Welcome, everyone. This is Kim Marie with the Evolutionary Astrology Network, and with me is Leroy running the board. This is one of our ongoing public classes on astrology, and this class is our Mercury Retrograde class. We have a Mercury Retrograde that is coming up February 6th through the 28th of 2014. Mercury is going to go retrograde at 3 degrees Pisces 20 minutes, and it will turn direct at 18 Aquarius 10 minutes. So for the next hour or two, we're going to explore everything around the world of Mercury. And as Leroy said, if any questions come up, you can type them in the question and answer area on your little panel. Control panel. You can also just click on the hand and raise your hand if you'd like us to unmute you and ask a live question or make any comments. And so as we get started with a webinar, we usually have a few beginning slides that show us who the Evolutionary Astrology Network is and what we're all about. And of course, with my background, I have 7 of my 10 planetary archetypes in either Sagittarius or the 9th house. So what do? I have turned in to be a teacher of astrology. And so a lot of our website is geared around being a student of astrology, from our free weekly podcast to our library to our course and certification. A little more detail on our Astro Library. This has been the brainchild of our new website. We absolutely love this. It is giving us such a succinct area to put material. Most of these classes end up there all in one of these sections sooner or later. In the last few weeks, Leroy added a few more hours. I think he added another
10 hours. 10 hours. All these forecasting
15.
webinars did indeed end up in that section 3, the forecasting, relationship, relocation, health and wellness. Section 3 includes all the forecasting calls like this. So yeah, it's just been augmented with all 5 of these recently produced webinars for the beginning of the year. So yeah, including the 2014 forecast, which again is going to be relevant all year long. So a tremendous value there. You can get section 3 for $29 a month as opposed to that $19 on the screen. We've just raised the price of that because we've increased the amount of material in there so much, and tremendous amount of value with all of these sections. You can subscribe by the month. You can do it monthly recurring, and of course you can also do it by 6-month set time period or an annual set time period. And right now, as a participant in this call, if you enter the coupon code NEBULA, that's NEBULA, upon checkout, you receive $10 off of a 6-month or a 12-month subscription to any one of these sections. So thank you for allowing me to get that information out there at the beginning of your class, Kim.
You're most welcome, Medium. I'll get the slides reflected. I'll update the slide for you. And of course, one of the biggest things that I do is teach these 3 core segments of our multimedia course. You can see them on the screen right here. And you can go to the website for more information on all of these. We're in process of expanding the students area to all have their own separate sections on the website as our web programmer recovers from his motorcycle accident. Starting last month, I began teaching monthly webinars. In other words, this exact format we're sharing tonight. I teach monthly webinars on both segments 1 and 2. And so the monthly classes on segment 2 are brand new. We're just getting started. So if you want to learn more about relationships via segment 2, intimate and family, still plenty of time to join us and come along for the ride with this new format of classes. And so everyone, as we get started with Mercury Retrograde, we're going to go right into some of the astronomy. I always like to include what I loosely call the astronomy along with the astrology. You can see from your screen here that Mercury actually goes around the sun every 88 days. And because the Earth is traveling at the same time and Mercury gets ahead of it, then it goes retrograde and falls behind, it appears as though it takes Mercury a year to go around the zodiac, and that's due to its retrograde cycles. But if we were in the middle of sun, Mercury would run around it in 88 days. If you average out as forward motion, retrograde motion, Mercury has a daily mean motion of about a degree per day. 365 days in a year, 360 degrees in a circle. You can see where it looks as though Mercury takes a year to go around the zodiac. Now, Mercury will have anywhere from 3 to 4 retrograde cycles each and every year, and its retrograde period will last anywhere from 20 to 24 days. And when Mercury slows down to turn retrograde, stationary retrograde, it appears as though it's actually standing still in the sky for one day. And then when it turns stationary direct at the end of a retrograde cycle and goes forward again, it appears to stand still one day. That's called the stationary period. That's why so many times when Mercury's turning retrograde and direct, a lot of astrologists say that day before, day of, day after, that's that intensity of Mercury's change of direction, and that can be some of the most crucial times of any mercurial accidents or upsets coming along, because it, again, Mercury travels so fast that for it to actually slow down and appear to stop in our heavens from our Earth-centered, geocentric viewpoint, it's an intensity of energy, because that's not Mercury is the messenger. Mercury is the trickster. Mercury in the Romans was the god of travel, and so Mercury's always in movement, and we can get that from it ruling left brain conscious mind. So it's interesting to keep track again of these stationary periods right when Mercury's turning retrograde and direct, and sometimes it's just the important messages that have come along. Now, as you can see from this little graph here, I've put elongation. I may not have the right word. It's the best one that I came up with. But from our Earth-centered viewpoint, if you look at these arrows right here, the furthest that Mercury can appear to get from the sun is 29 degrees in the zodiac. That is why astrologers will say whatever your sun sign is, your Mercury sign can be the sign before, the sign of, or the sign after. But you'll never have Mercury 2 or 3 signs off in the zodiac. And that's because Mercury is so close to the sun in its orbit of going around the sun that, again, it never appears to be more than 29 degrees away from the sun. 29 degrees ahead, and then it goes retrograde until it has the interior conjunction, and then it'll be 29 degrees behind it, superior conjunction, catch up again. So it goes back and forth between those two directions. Now, I included this slide. This is from some teachings of Dane Rudier, and I got it from a website, mindfire.ca, so I'd like to give this website credit. And if you will start over here with A or point X, this is just a visual of what we are actually seeing when we watch the whole Mercury retrograde cycle as it goes around the sun. And this is its actual travels around the sun, even though it may appear a little different as it's doing that from the perspective of Earth. But you can see that when it gets here, it's always got its brightest part as the evening star before it again gets to this point where it goes retrograde, appears to go backward through the zodiac, then it goes direct, and then it comes back out as a morning star. When Mercury's retrograde and it has this interior conjunction, it would be like its Earth is right on the bottom here where this arrow is. Mercury's between Earth and Sun. This is why it would be called an interior conjunction. When Mercury's direct up here by this X and it has the superior conjunction, it's furthest away from the sun. So that's just a little visual for you, and we don't have to get too complicated about it. It's just, again, Mercury's revolution around the sun as we will watch it from our Earth-centered perspective. Now, something about Mercury retrograde patterns for you. The Mercury retrograde cycles reverse through the elements. If you study astrology, you get used to saying the four elements: fire, earth, air, water, such as Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer. However, the Mercury retrograde cycles go backwards through the elements. Mercury turns retrograde a little earlier and a little earlier and a little earlier if you were watching these retrograde cycles. There were a few years ago where Mercury retrograde was always turning retrograde over Christmas. And I have a young friend of mine who's been an astrology student over the years, and we've come through many things together. I know I was her mother before. And I do trade-outs with her with astrology, and every year she comes back to Rapid City for Christmas vacation with her parents, and Leroy and I get our Christmas massage. Well, for about 3 years there, it was a running joke between us because she could never get the plane flights to divvy out right, and we missed a few years worth of our massages, and we had to reschedule them other times. Mercury was retrograde during those time periods. Now Mercury is retrograde more along the Thanksgiving time period. So each of those 3 or 4 retrogrades slowly get earlier and earlier in the year. And what Mercury does is it will more or less spend 1 year in one element, and then the next year it has a transitories where its retrograde cycle is actually in 2 different signs or 2 different elements. And example is that the 2014 retrograde cycles have Mercury going from water signs to air signs, each of the 3 retrograde cycles. Next year in 2015, all of the retrograde cycles will be in the air element, and then in 2016 they'll be going from air back to earth. And so it just cycles through those 4 elements, and that's something to know if you are a counseling astrologer, or if you do any of your own astrological forecasting. This is the pattern that Mercury makes, and so knowing those Mercury retrograde cycles by the elements gives you a flavor of what we are working with. Last year's retrogrades were all water, so a lot of emotion to them. Now we're going from the emotions to the air, and of course next year Mercury's retrograde cycles in the air element. Mercury rules air signs, earth signs. Mercury's comfortable with the element of air. They might be a little bit easier retrograde cycles next year in 2015. 2014's retrograde cycles are going to start with some emotional components, emotional upsets, and then we're going to have to go back and do the processing air of what those emotions meant. Now, when we look at the archetype of Mercury, just real briefly here, it's a dual archetype, Mercury and Venus, the 2 planets that have revolutions around the sun within the Earth's orbit. They're closer to the sun than the Earth is. Mercury and Venus both rule 2 signs of the zodiac at this point in astrology. The outer side of Mercury is its rulership of Gemini in the 3rd house. That is active, mutable air. So the outer comes from the active energy moving outward from the center. Mutable quadrant, adaptable, changeable, trying to put it all together, get along. And of course we have the element air, which is mental here. So this outer archetype of Mercury, well, both the outer and inner, we will call it the archetype of the left brain and the conscious mind. The Gemini 3rd house side is, you hear this about Mercury, how any soul will classify its phenomenal world, the world of manifestation, facts, figures, words. I'm sitting on a chair, I have my computers on my desk, I have earbuds in my ear. I have a glass of water and a glass of grapefruit juice beside me. This is Mercury. The communications of all types, the classifications of all of the manifested world that we can utilize and utilize with our brains in order to make sense of our world around us. And what we will do with facts, words, and figures is put 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 together. And we'll string it into a sentence. We'll string it into a thought that makes sense. So Mercury rules all forms of communications, any type of communication. So as you look at how many of us operate today through the world of our laptops or our iPads or texting with our phones, Mercury has rulership of all that type of stuff. And when Mercury goes retrograde, that's when the computer breaks down. That's when the, car accidents intensify because somebody's not paying attention to a detail in their world, like the stoplight or something. And so any of these electronic devices we have, there's going to be a larger rulership of Uranus because it rules technology. But Mercury comes along with all of these electronic devices. So we have to have a little bit of patience with all of our phones, iPads, computers during Mercury retrograde when they're not working the way we want them to work. And that includes the software issues as well. Now I put in a few words for the Gemini side of Mercury. Always the debatable one. Always will find that weakest link in any philosophy, the Sagittarius polarity. It is argumentative, but it's also, again, from that mutable quadrant, very adaptable. Mercury is very excitable. Relating it to that archetype of Gemini, Gemini is the twins. That's where Mercury can do that duality. Is it left or right, or black or white? Am I coming or going? That's that excitable mental air energy with Mercury's rulership of Gemini. Now the inner side of Mercury is its rulership of Virgo in the 6th house. And this is where Mercury turns passive. This is energy moving back toward the center. And it is the mutable quadrant, and it is Earth. And so this is the part of Mercury that then slows down and becomes internalized and practical. It's still the archetype of the conscious mind and left brain. But now, this inner side of Mercury, the Virgo side, brings in that ability to analyze, to reflect, to ponder everything. We're not just trying to collect the facts like Gemini does. We're now trying to make some type of sense of those facts, even though it still is left brain, 1 plus 1 equals 2 thinking. This also includes then our ability to reason. Just think of this archetype of Virgo in your own life. This is where you are internalized with yourself, self-reflecting. This is where you are pondering what you like, what you don't like, what you want to self-improve, what you want to change about yourself. Some of the key words that start to come in with the Virgo 6th house side of Mercury. Big one here is criticism. Because Virgo and its polarity Pisces, Pisces is the potential for perfection. Virgo gets aware of the lack of perfection. And so this is where that internal criticism can come in. And if we've internalized criticism with ourselves, then we also reflect it outwards to others, and vice versa. Others bring the criticism back to us. Now the Virgo-Pisces polarity also rules what we call the sadomasochism from human religions. And this is where we have bought into perfect God, imperfect humans, therefore we are guilty via imperfection. We have two responses to it. One of it is guilt linked to atonement. I must suffer. That is the masochistic side. The other side is guilt linked with anger. How dare they? I'm going to hurt them first. That's sadistic. The sadomasochism stems directly from the Virgo and Pisces archetype. And so one of the things that is so important about this inner side of Mercury is an ability to self-love and heal that criticism, heal all those sadomasochistic distortions, calm the nerves, let go of the worry and the anxiety. All of this stuff gets activated, both the Gemini side and the Virgo side. Everything we've just discussed in these last two slides is activated every time there's a Mercury retrograde cycle. And all we do is put the signs on top of this type of energy. And as Mercury turns retrograde, for instance, in early Pisces, we could run through criticism or anger or fear in regards to being abandoned by God, or where is God? Pisces. God, Goddess, Great Spirit. Now, in general, when Mercury goes retrograde, it is about releasing excess thought. It's about releasing worn out mental patterns. Think about Mercury's rulership of Gemini, and you read this and you see that on TV and you read this on the computer. We are so bombarded with information that we get on an overload. Remember that Gemini twins with Mercury? Too much thought, releasing thought. That's part of that duality of the outer side of Mercury. And so we have to have so many Mercury retrograde cycles a year from our Earth-centered viewpoint to calm the mind, to just let go of some of this stuff. And we have to let go of all these old, outworn mental patterns. And you can relate that to that Virgo side of Mercury, where we can get caught up in that mental spinning. I'm not pretty enough, I'm not skinny enough, I'm not smart enough, all the cup half empty stuff of Virgo Mercury that has to be replaced with cup half full. Because every Mercury retrograde is moving us from left brain to right brain. Left brain being that logical, detailed, analytical part of the brain, and right brain being the more holistic, intuitive side. And so just look at Mercury with its rulership of Gemini when it's retrograde on an archetypical level will point to Sagittarius and Jupiter, ruler of the right brain. And Mercury, through its rulership of Virgo, archetypically when it's retrograde, points to Pisces and Neptune. So a Mercury retrograde activates that entire mutable quadrant. Gemini, Virgo, Sag, Pisces. And so again, it is a time period to try and turn inward, quiet the brain, let go of all that excess thought, and see if our intuition has message for us. See if source energy has message for us with its rulership of Pisces Neptune. However, what happens in our phenomenal world with a Mercury retrograde? Details, details, details. The detail overload. Now, I have been working with astrology for 30 years now. I have a Sun, Mercury, Neptune conjunction, Sun, Mercury, Neptune, between 1 and 2 degrees Scorpio in the 9th house. I have noticed over 30 years of Mercury retrograde cycles. I'm approaching 100 Mercury retrogrades with my astrology. I have noticed that Mercury retrograde for me, and again, my Sun Mercury is like a half a degree apart. It's direct. It was a superior conjunction. I have noticed that Mercury retrogrades can have a tendency to come in like a lion, go out like a lamb, or vice versa. Come in like a lamb, not so bad, and go out like a lion. In other words, that detail overload isn't always necessarily 100% of the retrograde. Maybe it is for somebody and some people. I will notice it'll ebb and flow. I could probably research it back to the different elements, and Mercury and water signs might be a little quieter than Mercury and fire and air signs. But typically, in this manifested world, Mercury retrogrades mean something doesn't get done the first time, and we've got to do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. I always like to joke, this is where 3 times to get it right came from, because any retrograde will cover a certain amount of degrees in the zodiac 3 times. First passage goes retrograde, second passage goes direct, third passage again. Now, Leroy, I should just check in with you and see if I have questions from anybody as I'm traveling through this.
No raised hands on the board yet. Any questions out there for Kim?
Right.
Clarifications? Nope, we're clear.
All right. So, moving along, here are some of the dates with this Mercury retrograde cycle specifically. All right. And what we have here is when the planet reaches the degree that it's going to finish up the retrograde cycle with later on. In other words, Mercury ran into shadow January 22nd at 18 Aquarius. That is where it's going to go stationary direct on the 28th. So Mercury's in shadow from the time it first reaches 18 Aquarius to the time period when it goes retrograde, February 6th at 3:20 Pisces. This is the beginning shadow, or the first passage from 18 Aquarius to 3 degrees Pisces. Mercury's retrograde this time around, February 6th through the 28th. If you want the exact times, it goes retrograde February 6th at 2:43 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And it goes direct on the 28th at exactly 7 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Now, as I said, this is Mercury in its first shadow, beginning shadow. That first thing goes retrograde at 3 degrees all the way back to 18 Aquarius, goes direct, and then it enters that third passage through the shadow from 18 to 3 degrees. The highlight of all planetary retrogrades is when the planet either makes the conjunction or the opposition to the Sun. Mercury and Venus make conjunctions to the Sun. And when it is their retrograde conjunction, that means they are between the Earth and the Sun. They are closest to Earth. They're always brightest. All planets are always tend to be the brightest when they are closest to the Sun, or the brightest when they have their retrograde cycles. Excuse me. So this is the highlight of this Mercury retrograde cycle. I always call it the halfway point when Mercury conjuncts the Sun. And it doesn't necessarily occur exactly halfway through the number of days. It varies back and forth a little bit by a few days in exactly when Mercury makes that retrograde conjunction to the Sun. But it's almost like it would be the new phase when Mercury makes that interior conjunction. That's going to be the highlights of that Mercury retrograde messaging. So February 15th at 27 degrees Aquarius is the highlight of this Mercury retrograde cycle. This is when Mercury can get the most intense messages from Sun, solar life. And therefore, this is when, on an individual soul nature, and I'm sure this works on a collective level too, this is when we really get the aha points of this Mercury retrograde. And this one's going to be in late degrees Aquarius, and so there's going to be a lot of Aquarius and its ruler, Uranus, rules the unconscious mind, Mercury conscious mind. So this particular Mercury retrograde cycle can have a lot of unconscious information thrown up to the surface. And you want to pay attention to those spontaneous thoughts that are coming up all on their own during this Mercury retrograde cycle, and especially around that interior conjunction. Now, as you can see at the end of any Mercury retrograde cycle, and it goes direct on the March 20th, or excuse me, goes direct February 28th, excuse me, at 18 Aquarius, it then starts going faster and faster and faster until April 24th, about 2 months later, it's going to overtake the sun again, going direct at about 6 degrees Taurus. That's kind of like the full moon. There will be answers from this Mercury retrograde cycle, that latter part of April this year. And if anybody's been paying any attention here, that April 20th through 24th is just going to be so intense with the Grand Cross, Mercury retrograde, opposing Uranus and Jupiter in Cancer, opposing Pluto in Capricorn. There will be some messages about this Mercury retrograde that you'll want to pay attention to, because something will still get resolved that end of April when that Grand Cross is so highlighted. Now that Mercury conjunction, the end of April at 6 Taurus, something about that's going to, in other words, all the information coming through on this Mercury retrograde cycle that is asking us to adjust things mentally, Mercury, there's going to be some calming down and resolving of it at the superior conjunction 6 degrees Taurus. It's going to allow us to reach some new level of self-reliance in some way. We'll go into a lot more detail about the Pisces-Aquarius part of this. I just wanted to give you these dates right off the bat. Now, here's one of the things about Mercury turning retrograde at 3 degrees Pisces. It will be only 1 degree away from Neptune at 4 degrees Pisces. So there's a punch to this Mercury stationary retrograde February 6th. Mercury and Neptune talk about analytical left brain mercurial energy meeting nebulous Neptune floating in the ethers. Really what it will be is trying to find clarity through all of the mental confusion going on. It's really going to ask us to kind of slow down and listen. What we can have happen with Pisces is we can get so caught up into delusions and illusions, our fantasy world. And so this Mercury turning retrograde right on top of Neptune is going to be kind of like a reality check. There could be some bubbles bursting. Well, that's not going to go anywhere. Well, I thought this was going to give me some inspiration in life, and I guess not. You know, and with Piscean energy, it could be anything that we have put together as a dream, as an ideal, as a goal, as something we yearn for. This Mercury retrograde is going to put a reality check on it. Is it something that is manifestable for you? Because what Pisces energy does is, if it's been there, done that, and we're clinging to it for security reasons, or if it's some type of illusion that is just not real for us, we get the Piscean letdown. And so be on the watch out a little bit for this. And it really is on deeper levels, source energy wanting to realign you with what's highest and best for you. And Mercury is going to be the messenger and give you the information on what that is. Now, typically, Mercury in Pisces, the left brain cannot put all the pieces together. The whole is greater than the parts that make it up. Now remember, Mercury Gemini, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, detailed, we try to break it down to figure it out. And Pisces does not work that way, neither does Sagittarius. So as Mercury turns retrograde, again, any letdowns, any things we can't quite figure out in our world, we're meant to surrender. We're meant to just slow down, quiet. Let our mind surrender to our intuition. Meditation could be something here. And you want the intuition to line up with those higher mind thoughts, Aquarius, that'll be coming through. So the flavor for this entire Mercury retrograde cycle in Pisces, 3 Pisces to 18 Aquarius, is really about quieting down, quieting the emotions, and facing anything that feels like a letdown, like a disappointment, and asking, Mercury retrograde, ask. Retrogrades are to review, reflect, throw off. Ask, what would you have me know, Source? What do I need to know here? You're going to have that 3 degrees Pisces to 18 degrees Aquarius somewhere in a house in your chart. And that's going to be the area of your life you're going to be working with this. If you have this in the 5th house, it's going to come through with creativity. It's going to come through with children. It might come through with a lover. And so you're just going to ask the question, how do I need to parent my children better? 5th house. If it's 2nd house, the Taurus house and resources, how do I deepen my inner resources? What would you have me know, Source? What am I supposed to be changing in regards to my own work and my own career and talents? What am I to be deepening with my own self-reliance? Ask the questions with Mercury retrograde. What would you have me know, Source? Bring me the messages. And Aquarius, when it's giving us the blueprints to the future, gives us repetitious thoughts. It sparks something into the mind again and again and again and again. And when it happens in a repetitive nature like that, that's our own soul trying to make the mind conscious of directions to go. And so this Mercury retrograde, we just got done with Imbolc, February 2nd, which is the ancestor time period where we would go with prophecy and divination. We would ask what the coming year is bringing for us. This will be somewhat of this Mercury retrograde. This can be a visionary Mercury retrograde when we are willing to quiet the mind. Questions, Leroy? I'm seeing some hands on the thing. Leroy, you're always free to interrupt me when there's a question or anything.
Go ahead, Brenda. Brenda, are you there? Perhaps you don't have your headset on, Brenda. I just unmuted you. Or maybe you can, here we go. Brenda's having some experiences with her computer. She doesn't look like she is going to be able to ask her questions. She was just wondering about what's going on with her system. So she's having some issues. I think that's what it's all about there, Kim. So let's move on to the next question right now. If anyone has one for Kim, just raise your hand.
Let's make it through an entire Mercury retrograde class without any computer hiccups. Ha
Well, so, Joanna, I might ask a question of Joanna, for Joanna that came in, and this is again one of those objective questions that people will ask about. How about Mercury, if this Mercury retrograde is happening in someone's 1st house, Kim?
Well, then it's going to be self-identity. It could be the physical body in general. Mercury retrograde in a first house is who am I? Especially if there's Pisces on the ascendant, because there could be some self-identity confusion with who I am. And this Mercury retrograde will help throw off all the parts of ourself that we think are us through our inner voice, inner relationship with ourselves. And so again, this Mercury retrograde in Pisces, starting out in Pisces, it's going to be one where we need to take the time to find inner peace and quiet down so we can hear, as Mercury reverses through Aquarius, what the messages are about new directions for clarity of thought and understanding within ourselves. And then the details are filled in by the house.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you, Kim. And then another question. Let's say someone would be experiencing this retrograde in their fourth house conjuncting a Saturn retrograde as well. So I assume that means it's perhaps in Scorpio, but any comments about?
No. That means somebody's either got to have Saturn in Pisces or Aquarius in the fourth house. And that's the moon ruled house. So it's a moon Saturn thing that starts to come in there. So there could be some emotional issues that come up, emotional abandonment issues that could come up with this. Mercury retrograde over Saturn is having to take charge of our own mental thoughts and become responsible. Thoughts are things. You know that little cliche, thoughts are things? And so we want to harness that energy of Saturn to with Mercury and focus the thoughts differently. You know, what we have to be careful of with Mercury turning retrograde in Pisces is falling into any sense of victimization. And if we do, then as it reverses through Aquarius, we can re-imprint, re-experience traumas. We're talking the last two signs of the zodiac with a Mercury retrograde. So you've got to be going towards higher mind and connection to source energy, Aquarius and Pisces. And when it gets into the fourth house, it's going to emphasize the emotions and emotional victimization, or being able to release all those old patterns and reach a new level of emotional self-reliance, a new connection to source energy. Saturn would be like it's going through the 10th house. You have to look at where your need for self-responsibility is evolving. This retrograde in Pisces Aquarius, again, all of us can be triggered back into victimization and trauma. And we've got to exercise Mercury retrograde into going, why do I think this? Why do I feel this way? What do I need to throw off? How do I find deeper inner peace? How do I find my next level of clarity and thought so that I can re-empower myself, not feel that I'm a victim of the world?
Another question came up, Kim, about the orbs with a Mercury stationary retrograde in a solar return chart.
When Mercury is...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It stations the day before this particular person's solar return in the 12th house.
Then you're going to have a Mercury retrograde station for the next year on that solar return chart. It will feel like somebody is having a year-long Mercury retrograde. And the orbs that are used, evolutionary astrology uses wider orbs because everything is in relationship to everything else, and everything is always in a process of unfolding or evolution. You could use anywhere from a 5 to 10 degree orb with Mercury retrograde. And when it comes down to those stations, stationary retrograde, stationary direct, you definitely can, go out there into wider orbs. Mercury's going to be having an impact because we're standing still those 3 days on either side.
Gotcha. How about a Mercury retrograde, of course, in that house of that Aquarius, of course, rules, or and of course Uranus. That's the 11th house. How about Mercury
The
retrograde?
11th house is everything I've been talking about. Everything we're talking about with Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. You can re-traumatize yourself, or you can be throwing off the trauma. You're going to get all kinds. Uranus, the Aquarius, in the 11th house. So this is going to be true of this Mercury retrograde in general. Uranus Aquarius in the 11th house is the unconscious mind, and it rules the past and all its details, this and every lifetime. It rules everything we suppress in the present life that we don't want to deal with, Saturn pushing it below the surface, and it rules the blueprints of the future. So Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, Mercury retrograde in the 11th house, past, present, future, all popping up into the conscious mind, and it can get really confusing. And therefore, again, this is why with this Mercury retrograde, there needs to be quieting down. There needs to be a quieting time to be able to process all of the thoughts that are coming through Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. And you want to pay attention to the repetition in the thoughts. And all of a sudden, it's, for instance, something that happened earlier in this lifetime, some traumatic event, and you're going, why am I thinking about this again? Because Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, something was wounded, and you want to process through another layer of it, throw off that old wound, and reach a greater level of freedom. Think of it as the child who was learning how to ride the bicycle, and they fell off, and they never want to ride a bike again. If we go through any experience in life and there was trauma around it, how many times do we avoid that situation? And yet, if you look at the child learning how to ride the bike, what do the parents do? Put them on the bike again. Put them on the bike again. So they create a new memory process, new muscle memory, till they learn to ride that bike, and they move past the trauma. We take that same bicycle exercise in all kinds of experiences in our life. So Mercury retrograde is the throw off. What are the old traumas? Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, or for somebody who has it in an 11th house, double signature. What are the old traumas to throw off? Past lives? Something popping up? Earlier in this life suppressed? Something that happened last week that we want to process through, rather than allow it to rule us.
And of course, another listener out there has this Mercury retrograde conjuncting their south node in Pisces. So again, all the Neptunian factors come in one more time. And that's in the 12th house as well.
Yes.
So that's a triple signature. Yeah.
Triple signature of releasing victimization, releasing the sense of being powerless in the world, and really, really opening up to reconnect with source energy so that we have a direct voice with source, speaking to source, source speaking to us. That'll be true generically for everybody with this Mercury retrograde. Just more emphasized with a south node in Pisces, the emotional past. It's time to take another look at that past, review it, process through it, ponder it, break free from it, rewrite it mentally, Mercury. All right, sweetie, I'm going to move on so I get through my material.
Sure.
We can bring up more questions later. Now, I have a tendency to use a 30-degree dial whenever I'm looking at aspects, which means I look at both major and minor aspects. These are all of the Mercury retrograde aspects in this retrograde cycle. It is an active Mercury retrograde cycle. Now these aspects that are listed, I'm going to go through them one by one, give you a couple of key notes from. This is transiting in the sky, transit to transit. So this is all true for every one of us. It's just going to be flavored where it falls individually in our own personal houses. All of these aspects are going to occur 3 times except for Venus. Venus has 2 different aspects with Mercury. So like I said, I am going to go through these again and again, or I'm going to go through these one by one. But if you just take a look here, Mercury has more waxing aspects than waning. There's 2 waning aspects, Uranus and Jupiter. The rest are all waxing. And so it's a Mercury retrograde, but it's building. So while Mercury is throwing off old mental patterns, while Mercury's throwing off old victimization, Pisces, old traumas, Aquarius, it's still building to more planets than it's not. So we want to be reaching for a better feeling thought, a better feeling thought, a better feeling thought through Mercury retrograde. First off, Mercury's aspects to Venus. Now Venus is just freshly direct, January 31st. Mercury going retrograde February 6th. You can look here, Mercury has 2 waxing semi-sextiles to Venus, 2 waxing semi-squares. Mercury and Venus usually go from conjunctions to 60 degrees apart. You don't find Mercury and Venus in the sky getting 90 degrees away from each other because they're too close to the sun. So they go from about 0 to almost 60 degrees apart in their aspects to each other. You never find them much further apart. And so one of the biggest things is with Venus direct, Mercury is going to continue the processing for Venus around the new values, Venus's values, Venus in Capricorn. It's affected career, it's affected family. Because it's Venus, there's relationships. So all of us have this evolution of our value system with Venus in Capricorn. And Capricorn is going to be the signature for the next Venus cycle, the next 19 months. And so it's like a Venus-Saturn flavor. It's like, okay, I have to grow up. What am I going to do when I grow up? What am I going to be when I grow up? Venus is a serious flavor for the next 18, 19 months in Capricorn before it starts the next retrograde cycle. And so, you know, Venus is more responsible in career, family, relationships, and serious about how we're wanting to move forward with everything. So Mercury's going to come in and put some flavor into that. You will see here that, you know, 3 of the aspects, Mercury's in Aquarius, 1 just barely into Pisces, as you look at what's on the screen here. So as Mercury is going through this Aquarius process with Venus, there is a lot of mental busyness around Venus. Okay, well, I've decided that this is what's important to me. These are my financial goals over the next year. This is how I want things to change in my family. This is what I want to be, you know, doing with my loved one. And so Mercury's going to be overly active in helping you figure out how to go about it. A waxing semi-sextile. This is the January 21st, February 11th aspects. January 21st, February 21st, excuse me. Waxing semi-sextiles, okay, is the 30-degree mark. Mercury's 30 degrees in front of Venus. That's a spark of inspiration. That is, I've got to be trying something new. How do I want to process these new values? How do I want to act on these new values? How do I want to communicate these new values? When Venus gets to the waxing semi-square, the 45-degree mark, these two aspects in the middle here on your page, that's when we're moving from new phase to crescent phase. All right? And Mercury will be in that crescent phase to Venus from January 30th to February 11th. It's right here, right now, as we're talking. There is a struggle with the crescent phase and that 45-degree mark of the semi-square. It's like, I want to do this new stuff with Venus, but I don't exactly know the how. I don't know the right way to do it. Am I doing it right? Mercury could be doubting itself. But again, Mercury is ahead of Venus. It's waxing, building from Venus. So we are trying to move Venus forward. We are trying to process doing our Venus values that are most important to us differently. For me, give you an example just generically, I'm moving into teaching classes off of webinars. It's a lot more work than just getting on the phone and blabbing this all to you. I could blab everything I'm saying tonight just off the top of my head. But if I have to go through putting these slideshows together, there's a few more hours of work involved, like a lot, because I feel like I'm on a learning curve. But Venus in Capricorn, it's been important to me to move with the times and switch to webinars. So my Mercury is pretty busy trying to figure out all these details and try to get more efficient at doing PowerPoint slideshows. Practical little thing with this Mercury to Venus. So there's the example. So just reflect on Venus and say what's important to me around this Venus retrograde cycle in Capricorn and Venus now direct, moving that third passage from 13.5 Capricorn to 29 Capricorn. That's Venus's 3 passages by degree. How is Mercury going to help me fine-tune my goals and my values of how I'm moving forward? Career, family, and relationships. Now Venus is going to make waxing trines to Mars. This is the nice Mercury aspect. You know, this is the excitability for Mercury. Mercury's in Mars is in Libra. It's the last trine is going to be in its retrograde. But, you know, Aquarius and Libra, we're in 2 air signs. Mercury likes air. Mercury will be very helpful to Mars in Libra in really being able to figure out those desires, Mars, in relationships and how it is we really want to move forward. So I put some keywords in here. Accessing detachment objectivity, that's the Aquarius. And reviewing relationship desires and actions. There's the Mars retrograde cycle that we're talking about. And so this Mercury retrograde, again, is going to be helpful in figuring out the changes we want to make in our relationships. I'm going to say that it's going to be necessary to talk about things again and again and again and again with this Mercury-Mars aspect. Because while we want our relationships changing, and Libra, yes, it's intimate relationships, but I like to say Libra is the relationships with everybody beyond a casual acquaintance. So there's going to be that diversity of relationships with Libra. And everybody's going to want to be changing their relationships with this Mars retrograde cycle coming up. So we've got to talk it through and talk it through and talk it through and talk it through. Now, some of the distortions or the couch potato laziness of the trine aspect is to stay stuck in the same old thoughts and actions. Life is about evolution. It's that, what's that old saying when you I'm not going to remember it, so I'll just paraphrase. When you try to take the same approach to the same problem again and again and again and expect a different solution, that's the laziness of these Mercury-Mars trines. And so make the effort in general This Mars retrograde in Libra is going to require action through the Mars retrograde cycle. This Mars retrograde is pointing to Aries. And so Mars in Libra. And Marie has Mars in Libra. Am I going to do it this way or that way? Oh gosh, I don't want to say anything that's going to hurt somebody. I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt somebody's feelings. Mars in Libra. So as we're all going through this Mars in Libra retrograde cycle together, we can get quite wishy-washy. And this Mercury retrograde with these 3 trines is a blessing for clarity. I hear you, Leroy. Got a question or comment?
Well, thank you. Yes, I was just responding to someone who was curious about this Mercury retrograde that gets to move back over the descendant in the sign of Aquarius and into the 6th house. What could we alert this particular person to?
Well, relationships are going to be in the air. And you're going to have to, 7th back to 6th, Mercury retrograde. Relationships are going to be more active than normal. And if Aquarius is on that 7th house cusp, the descendant, you're trying to reach for objectivity in relationships. It's going to be almost a double signature of this aspect here with Aquarius over the 7th house, the Libra house. It's going to be asking for detachment, objectivity. Where's the fairness and the balance in the relationship, in my life? And it's going to require you to process your relationship communications and patterns differently with people.
Of course, 10-4. And as it stations direct, and then with Mercury and Aquarius through that 6th house, would it be appropriate to suggest paying attention to that mental stress, health issues that might relate to this overanalyzation that can go on with 6th house energy, etc.?
Yes, yes, yes. And there's going to be Mercury retrograde in the 6th house. There's going to be that need to improve your mental relationship with yourself as you go forward with others. There's some old attitudes about relationships that someone could be clinging to that are no longer serving the soul. Aquarius is about detachment. So Mercury retrograde in Aquarius is about seeing the larger picture of everything and then coming in and doing the Leo polarity and living it.
A good one. That's a good byword, isn't it, Kim? Or keyword, detachment and objectivity with this retrograde.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely. But again, I look at this Mercury waxing trine to Mars as being, again, it's going to be one of the ways to channel that Mercury energy through this retrograde. And it's going to be helpful to this Mars retrograde coming up. And have the conversations, have the communications, communicate. Mercury retrograde is about talking. Mercury retrograde is talking about it 10 times. And hopefully that 8th, 9th, 10th time it starts to click. Mercury retrograde is not avoiding communications. It is making the effort to communicate. And this Mercury retrograde in Pisces-Aquarius, there's an inner communication that needs to go on for us. Mercury is going to make waxing squares to Saturn and Scorpio. Here's the tough aspect with the relationships. Saturn's in Scorpio. It's going to be slowing down and turning retrograde here in early March. So you can see how the 3 Mercury waxing squares are going to be touching Saturn as it goes retrograde. So again, relationships are going to be serious stuff. The first half of this year with Venus retrograde and Mars retrograde. And this Saturn turning retrograde is, we're into the nitty-gritty of the middle degrees of Scorpio with this Saturn retrograde. Now, what we have to be careful of is the fact that we could re-imprint relationship trauma, Aquarius trauma, Scorpio relationships. It's a 90-degree square, a waxing square, crises in action. So Mercury has got to let go of those old abandonment and betrayal patterns, and it's got to rewrite the script. So Mercury detaching with Aquarius is going, what was my role in this relationship situation? What is my lesson to learn? I'm a co-creator in this particular situation, whatever it is. So what am I to learn? And how can I see it differently? How can I do it differently? How can I bust out of my old victimization patterns from Mercury stationary retrograde in Pisces? How can I self-love on the deepest levels possible? Mercury retrograde pointing towards Leo. How do I self-love as deeply as possible so that I don't have to be so Saturn and Scorpio controlling? I'm going to address this whole Saturn and Scorpio retrograde cycle because it's such an intense signature, and it's got the mutual reception with Pluto and Capricorn. I'm going to have a class just on Saturn retrograde in Scorpio, and we'll look at that because Saturn is trying to evolve past all of the scorpionic words: betrayal, abandonment, manipulation, jealousy, possessiveness, obsessiveness. And Mercury in this waxing square is really trying to make us aware of where we'll have those old patterns operating within us. Because in this westernized world of patriarchal conditionings, we've all had abandonment and betrayal. We've all got a Scorpio. We've all got an 8th house. We've all got a Pluto in our chart. Saturn in Scorpio is revisiting it all consciously for 2.5 years. We've got a mini cycle here with these 3 waxing squares that Mercury can help us detach, see it, review it, release it, rewrite it. Make that effort. Now, Mercury is going to be making waning semi-squares to Saturn in Aries. Now, I want to just do something here for a moment. Mercury is going to be sandwiched in between Uranus and Pluto. Uranus and Pluto are making the square 90 degrees apart. Mercury's halfway between the two. 3 aspects, 3 semi-squares each to Uranus and Pluto. This Mercury retrograde is going to be intense with the Uranus-Pluto squares. Mercury-Uranus is a waning semi-square. There's a surrendering. We're moving into the balsamic phase. Mercury-Pluto is moving into crescent phase. There's something that needs to be initiated. So let's go back to Mercury. Waning semi-squares, the 315-degree mark to Uranus in Aries. This is Mercury aspecting the ruler of Aquarius. There's going to be a need for deep inner reflection time. There's a lot of insights that we can pick up on and receive with these Mercury-Uranus aspects. There's a lot of that Uranian lightning bolt, those spontaneous flashes about the future, that can easily be coming through with these aspects with Mercury-Uranus. And it will also be about, one more time, throwing off those old traumas, making that trauma conscious. You know, during this Mercury retrograde, whatever comes up in your world, little stuff, big stuff, you just want to take that moment and go, why? What's it mean? What's it to teach me? What am I to learn? How do I need to look at things differently? There's so much that we could do, that we can do with this Mercury retrograde. It's there could be a lot of world stuff that goes on too, with Mercury being in last two signs of the zodiac. Stay tuned. We'll see how the Olympics come along through the month of February with the Mercury retrograde. Leroy, my sports husband, of course, we watch the Super Bowl. It's like a family affair on his side of the family. My dad couldn't tell you what team was playing, and Leroy's family had two betting pools going on. And as we watched that Super Bowl cream out yesterday, I was like, well, here's the shadow of Mercury retrograde. Surprise!
Especially in our neck of the woods with all those Denver Bronco fans.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So this Mercury with this waning semi-square, again, it's going from last quarter phase to balsamic phase, which is very Piscean. And so Mercury Uranus are pretty excitable together, so they could bring some upsets individually and collectively. But by nature of the aspect, waning semi-square, 315 degrees, it is for us to get it mentally. Conscious mind Mercury, unconscious mind Uranus. It's to go, whoa, I got what that meant. Oh, that's why that happened. Oh, I saw that pattern coming through. Now I really get it. And so you again want to allow that deep, insightful part of yourself to access these two planets. It's like that veil between the unconscious world is going to be thinned with this aspect. So you're going to be dealing with past, present, and future Uranus all at the same time. And when it's something about the past, you want to figure out the pattern so that you can make sense of it, so you can heal it, so it no longer triggers you anymore. And at the same time, you could have stuff about the future coming in. And the more we heal the past, the more freedom we have for moving forward differently with our future. So these two are going to be quite insightful. It's possible, that there could be some pretty amazing technology breakthroughs that are starting to come through. Because Leroy and I keep abreast of the consensus world. I saw something on TV where they are now developing cars that have 360-degree communications with other cars. So if a car in front of you suddenly puts on your brakes, all of a sudden things start beeping and your seat starts vibrating to get you to pay attention to the road in front of you. It's Mercury Uranus, moving things forward with technology. When it comes to the individual soul, it's going to be about a beautiful liberation process. Because this is a waning semi-square, it brings that Pisces energy back as well. I think that these aspects between Mercury and Uranus could be very good for us in feeling a deeper connection to source energy. And not from the blind faith Piscean way, but from the Aquarian broader insights, from a knowledge-based way that is just deepening our understanding of the cosmos and helping us be more in touch with this, the whole quantum physics world. This is the aspect that'll bring the insight. But at the same time that these insights are coming through, Mercury feels again squished between Uranus and Pluto. And Mercury then makes 3 waxing semi-squares to Pluto in Capricorn. And that shift at the 45-degree mark from new phase to crescent phase, well, both the Uranus and Pluto aspects are going from yang phase to yin phase, outer to inner. And that's why I'm saying Even though Mercury is waxing to Pluto, it's going into crescent phase, and so there needs to be some quiet time to process. Capricorn needs to process. Aquarius can be lightning bolt. The Capricorn needs that slow and steady process to really understand. And so we need to be able to have a lot of reflection about how our world is changing. And Mercury Pluto is going to run into, there's going to be choice points here with Mercury sandwiched between Uranus and Pluto. But Mercury waxing to Pluto, there's going to be choice points about how we want to go forward with our world. And the choice points, we make the best choices for ourselves, the more we are able to access our own self-responsibility. Big old pattern with Pluto and Capricorn is self-responsibility. And as Mercury makes that 45-degree mark, we have to be moving into self-responsibility, accepting that on all levels of our life. Wait a minute, I don't like this about my world, but what have I done to create it up to this point? What do I want to change about it then? How do I want it to be different? This is going to be a pretty active and intense Mercury retrograde cycle with all of these aspects going on. So that time to reflect becomes so necessary. And that courage, that 45-degree mark going into crescent phase, there's a courage that's required there to move forward, because the opposite phase, disseminating, it's about everybody else knows more than me. It's about everybody else is more powerful. And so Mercury Pluto is almost like that little train. I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, and I can, or whatever that is. That's how Mercury is being tempered with Pluto during this. So there's going to be changing these thought patterns and not accepting the limitations of the reality. Okay, this is what is real. This is what is in my face. But am I going to be self-defeated by it? Or am I going to find an ability to change it, to process it differently, to put different actions into place? Remember, Mercury is waxing square Pluto, waxing trine Mars. There's still activity in this Mercury retrograde while we are having to take that reflection time and detach and ponder into it. Mercury makes a waning sesquisquadrate to Jupiter. Let me see, I think this is the 225-degree mark, if I'm doing it off the top of my head. 180, yep, 225. This is the waning sesquisquadrate. This is going from full phase to disseminating phase. And again, Mercury is waning aspects to Uranus and Jupiter. So it's almost like Mercury's receiving deep intuitive hits from Jupiter and Uranus, and yet the waxing aspects are saying, okay, we're giving you the intuitive hits, but you got to put them into action. And Mercury retrograde 3 times to get it right. And so with these waning sesquisquadrates, there is a chance to re-imprint emotional and familial traumas, or see the pattern and break free. There can be some emotional confrontations during this Mercury retrograde, especially these dates when the Mercury-Jupiter hits are coming along. And so we're going to have to work with new levels of emotional security inwardly. We're just finishing up Jupiter's 4-month retrograde cycle. Jupiter's going to go direct here the beginning of March, in about a month. And so those deeper levels of emotional self-reliance will then allow us to do that Mercury Retrograde Aquarius, step back, look at it from a broader point of view, objectify it, rather than jumping all over the place emotionally. It still might happen, but if you do have those emotional upsets, outbursts, meltdowns, then just ask that famous why question. What's the pattern being triggered here? What's the old familial patterns? Where's my little inner wounded child still hurt? How am I moving through things? What do I need to know? How do I need to self-love deeper? The waning Sesquisquadrate, the 225-degree mark, is 15 degrees Scorpio on the natural zodiac. So there can be this sense of, again, deep emotional confrontations or betrayal, abandonment of Scorpio. That's the aspect degree between these two planets. And Mercury is there to help us recognize those emotional patterns. And it's there to help us heal that pattern, to rewrite it. Mercury also makes waxing trine to the North Node, 3 of them, and in the same time making same dates, just same degrees in Scorpio, Libra as in Taurus, Aries. It makes 3 waning sextiles to the South Node as well. So Mercury South Node, this is where we are reviewing. We're reaching the end of the nodal axis in Scorpio, Taurus. The nodes are going to change, I think, in February 22nd, I think, is the date. So we're less than a month out of the 1.5-year cycle of the nodal axis in Scorpio, Taurus. So that waning sextile to the South Node, that's an access point for new levels of self-reliance. I have figured out how to take care of myself better over the last 1.5 years, inwardly and outwardly. I'm aware of these evolving new talents, Taurus, within myself. And the waxing trines to the North Node, this is going to intensify, just like Saturn and Scorpio, relationship choice points. Why in the road or new commitments? And this is, again, trines and sextiles, so we can see some of the changes we are needing to make, and we can resist it, sextiles, trines, or make the effort. A little effort goes a long ways with sextiles and trines. And so as we're finishing up that North Node in Scorpio, and Saturn getting ready to go retrograde here in the next month, we're at relationship choice points, even with trines and sextiles. All right, I'm in it for the long haul. I'm ready to recommit to this relationship on new levels, new ways, new understandings, even through Saturn retrograde, or I'm done. I'm done. I've went as far as I can go at this point in the relationship. Now, how do I bring about a healthy ending? Our hellos are only as good as our goodbyes. This will feel like a more subtle aspect. Sometimes we may or may not notice this aspect, but it will still be there, and it will still be active. Excuse me. And Mercury will still be processing, especially because 2 of these 3 aspects are with Mercury in Pisces. As you can see, Mercury, as it turns stationary retrograde February 6th, it's like standing still. in this trine to the north node, sextile to the south node. And so it's going to require a little paying attention to all of the emotional subtleties that are taking place in our world. I think I've actually reached the end of my presentation. So I have one more slide here as I've put together some of my thoughts with this Mercury retrograde cycle, or conclusions. It's an ability to reach new levels of intuition, renew connection to evolving force. This Mercury retrograde is really about understanding the larger picture in our world, no matter what it is. It's about busting out of all those old patterns and traumas and reaching for new freedoms. And this Mercury retrograde, again, so the final, the last 22 degrees of Pisces, it moves 22 degrees backwards, or 22 degrees backwards in Aquarius. So this is about speaking one's truth and living one's truth. All right, I will entertain a few questions if we have any more in regards to this host subject. I'm going to give you just another moment if anybody wants to write down these themes for this Mercury retrograde.
Any questions for Kim?
Any questions in general on this Mercury retrograde cycle? Any questions specifically?
Go ahead and just raise your hand on the board and I'll unmute you.
I look at Mercury retrogrades as being a little bit easier retrograde cycle to understand. I mean, the consensus world jokes about Mercury retrograde. You know, people, this is one of the things that people start to learn in the world of astrology. So, reviewing, reprocessing the left brain, throwing off the old stuff. You put it through this Pisces-Aquarius flavor, and there's a deepening of intuition, connection to source energy, and there's really a lot of detachment, objectivity. Mercury is, this is an easier Mercury retrograde in Aquarius when it's in an air sign. Mercury likes Aquarius. It has a lot of aspects, as you just saw. And again, you'll have the recording of this webinar. You'll have the PDF of all the slides. You can review this if anybody wants to work with this again.
And as just a reminder, if anyone out there is guided to take advantage of our new Astro Library and wants to subscribe to a 6-month or annual subscription to any section, or again, all sections are available as well, you can now get $10 off those 6-month and 12-month subscriptions by just using the coupon code NEBULA, N-E-B-U-L-A, upon checkout on our website. So thank you again for tuning in, everyone. And thank you, Kim, for all the preparation for a free webinar for our students. And as always, we appreciate that effort, and we appreciate everyone tuning in as well.
I do have a couple more slides. I just reviewed my notes. Here's the future Mercury retrograde classes and Mercury retrograde cycles. And as you can see, the month of June, there's a Mercury retrograde from Cancer to Gemini. And then you can see that October 4th, there's a Mercury retrograde cycle from Scorpio to Libra. So to repeat, all 3 Mercury retrogrades this year are going to start with water. They're going to have an emotional impact. And then through the retrograde, it's going to be the mental processing of the emotions that were brought up. that were raised. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And so stay tuned. We'll have some more announcements on this, and those class dates are a part of. I have been adding on more classes. And so here's future classes that are coming up on Mercury, or not just Mercury Retrograde. I'm repeating those dates that you saw earlier. It's not all the classes for the year, but it is just what's kind of popping in my head at the moment on some teachable subjects for the public. So there's the February 24th, Libra Aries. I think Leroy may already have them up on the website, maybe not.
It is. So Libra Aries Nodal Axis is available to enroll now on that individual streaming workshop page, which is under the Astro Library link on the homepage of our website. Pretty easy to find. And of course, if you're not already, get on our Astro newsletter list, because we send out that weekly notification with lots of information in it when we post a new podcast. And of course, there's always links to these classes in the newsletter. So remember to join Astro News, because you also get the Jupiter and Cancer webinar completely free for doing so. So anyone new, join us on Astro Newsletter.
And so there's the list of classes. If you just want to kind of jot down the dates, we'll definitely make things, you'll definitely hear about it if you're on any of our newsletters. And so if it's all right with everybody, I will, and I'll try and push this in like a newsletter, so this is not just only on a slide. I'll take this PDF and I'll attach it to the newsletter so that you can download this and see the list so far. I will not teach any classes in May to the public, because we have an 18-year-old graduating from high school and a big family activity. And Leroy and I are taking the month of August off from all classes, so there won't be any classes in August. But as I looked at my schedule, it was like, all right, here's some subjects to work with. So back to this slide in this new Mercury retrograde cycle. Remember, Mercury retrograde points to the right brain, by the Gemini polarity to Sag, and the Virgo polarity to Pisces. This Mercury retrograde in Pisces-Aquarius will have us more right-brained than usual. It will have us more mentally aware of the larger picture than usual. And that will be most helpful in dealing with all of these Mercury aspects that we have going on. Mercury's not always this active in a retrograde cycle. So make sure you breathe. Breathe. And pace yourself with all of these Mercury aspects going on over the course of the next 2 months. All right, so one final call. Do I have any questions, comments from anybody?
Seems like we're clear to go, Kim.
All right, well then we will sign off at this point, everybody. And so I thank you very much for wanting to tune into this. Allow that intuition and higher mind to flourish in the month of February. Thank you, everyone. Good night.